they thought she was just a medic. A fragile human. When they locked her in with the deadliest predator in the galaxy, they expected screams. Instead, they heard her laugh. "Let's dance," she whispered, and survival became her game. The metallic clang of the door slamming shut behind her reverberated through the cavernous chamber. Dr. Evelyn Carter, still dazed from the sedative gas that had dragged her into unconsciousness, winced as the sound shot through her head like a needle. She straightened slowly, her boots crunching against the icy floor. The air was biting cold, her breath crystallizing in front of her face. A sterile voice echoed from unseen speakers, its tone devoid of emotion. Containment Test 479, initiated. Subject, human. Opponent, Unit X-91. Observers, stand by. Eve rubbed the back of her neck, her fingers brushing against the jagged edges of a collar strapped around her throat. She didn't need a mirror to know it was a tracker. She scanned her surroundings, a dimly lit arena with walls that glowed faintly blue, likely reinforced by some alien alloy. High above, she could make out shadowy figures peering down through thick glass. "Great," she muttered. "Lab rats with a god complex." A low, guttural growl broke the silence, rolling through the chamber like distant thunder. Eve's body stiffened, her instincts kicking into overdrive. Across the arena, two glowing amber eyes blinked into existence, their gaze locking onto her. The creature stepped into the faint light, its massive frame sending ripples through the air. It was a wolf, but not the kind she knew from Earth. This thing was massive, its sleek black fur rippling like liquid shadow over powerful muscles. Bone-like spines jutted out along its back, and its claws clinked against the floor with an unsettling precision. Its breath came in visible puffs, each exhale revealing a maw full of jagged, glistening teeth. Eve swallowed hard but refused to let fear take hold. "Well," she said, rolling her shoulders, "you're a big boy. But I've dealt with worse." The beast didn't charge immediately. Instead, it circled her, its massive head tilting as if analyzing her every move. She mirrored its pacing, her boots scuffing the floor as she adjusted her weight to stay ready. From above, a voice crackled through the speakers. It was smoother, richer, dripping with condescension. "Humans are fascinating creatures," it mused. "Fragile, yet stubborn. Let's see how long this one lasts." Eve smirked, tilting her head toward the shadowy figures. "Bet you 5 credits I outlast your ego, buddy." The wolf lunged, a blur of speed and ferocity. Eve barely managed to dive out of the way, the wind from its swipe brushing her cheek. She hit the ground hard but rolled quickly to her feet, heart hammering in her chest. The creature whirled, its claws skidding as it corrected its course. "All right," she muttered, scanning the arena for anything she could use. "Think, Eve. You're not going to win this with brute force." The chamber was sparse, a deliberate choice, she assumed, to minimize her chances of survival. But she noticed faint seams in the walls and floor, indicating hidden mechanisms. There was also a series of faint scorch marks on the ground, suggesting the arena had been used before. She crouched low, keeping her eyes on the wolf while mentally cataloging her surroundings. The beast prowled closer, its amber eyes gleaming with cruel intelligence. This wasn't just an animal. It was something engineered, designed to kill efficiently. But even the most dangerous predator could have a weakness. It lunged again, this time swiping with a claw aimed for her throat. She ducked, feeling the rush of air as the claws missed by inches. She pivoted on her heel, grabbing a shard of metal she'd spotted earlier, a jagged piece likely left behind from a previous fight. With a quick spin, she thrust the shard into the beast's flank. It howled, the sound a mix of pain and rage, and reared back. Eve scrambled away, keeping her breathing steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "First blood," she said, panting. "Guess you're not invincible after all." The wolf snarled, circling her again, more cautious this time. Eve felt a flicker of hope. Injured creatures, no matter how dangerous, could be outlasted. She just needed to stay ahead of it and use her wits. The voice from above returned, now tinged with annoyance. "Interesting. the human exhibits resourcefulness. But how long can she maintain the charade? Eve ignored the commentary, her mind racing. She noticed the wolf's stance was slightly off, its right hind leg bore less weight. An injury? She couldn't be sure, but it was her best bet. The wolf lunged again, but this time, Eve was ready. She sidestepped, using the beast's momentum to drive it into the wall. The creature hit hard, snarling as it shook off the impact. Eve didn't let up, she darted toward a control panel embedded in the floor. If she could figure out how to access it, maybe she could level the playing field. The wolf turned, blood dripping from its side, its growl deepening into a rumble that reverberated in her chest. Eve's fingers worked quickly, prying open the panel with the metal shard. Sparks flew as she exposed a tangle of alien circuitry. Come on, she muttered, her hands shaking as she manipulated the wires. She didn't fully understand the technology, but she knew enough to improvise. The wolf charged again, and this time, it was faster than before. Eve barely managed to activate the panel's system before diving out of the way. A burst of energy erupted from the floor, a low-frequency hum that sent the wolf skidding to a halt. It whimpered, its claws scraping at the ground as it backed away from the source of the sound. Eve grinned despite the sweat dripping down her face. "Guess you're not a fan of sonic dissonance," she said, catching her breath. The wolf hesitated, pacing just beyond the range of the sound wave. Eve used the moment to analyze her next move. The creature wasn't invulnerable, but it was far from defeated. And the voice from above, smug and observant, was still watching. "You're full of surprises, human," it said. "But let's see how you handle this." Before Eve could react, the sound wave abruptly cut off. The wolf growled low, sensing its advantage had returned. Eve clenched her fists, her mind racing for another strategy. The beast lunged once more, and Eve met it head-on, a determined fire in her eyes. "I'm not done yet," she hissed, ready to fight until her last breath. Eve barely dodged the wolf's snapping jaws, rolling across the cold floor with a grunt. The creature's claws scraped against the metal, a hair's breadth from her back. She scrambled to her feet, heart pounding in her chest, and darted behind a jagged outcrop of broken wall. "Not as quick as you think, huh," she muttered, wiping sweat from her brow. Her muscles ached, exhaustion creeping in, but she pushed it aside. There was no room for weakness here. The wolf prowled forward, its amber eyes locked on her hiding spot. It was intelligent, too intelligent for a mere beast. It wasn't lunging blindly anymore, it was studying her, recalculating its strategy. Eve's gaze flickered to the wound on its flank. Blood dripped steadily onto the icy floor, a dark contrast against the pale surface. She pressed her back against the wall and steadied her breathing. If she could exploit that weakness, she might just have a chance. Up above, the condescending voice of Commander Zerlon sliced through the tension. "Fascinating. It's remarkable how survival instincts can temporarily override human fragility. But how much longer can she keep this up?" Eve clenched her jaw. "Keep underestimating me, lizard," she muttered under her breath. "See where that gets you." The wolf prowled closer, nostrils flaring as it caught her scent. Eve knew she couldn't stay hidden for long. She glanced at the shard of metal still clutched in her hand, her only weapon. It wasn't much, but it had drawn blood once, and that was enough to give her hope. The beast lunged. Eve rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding its snapping teeth, and lashed out with the shard. The metal blade tore into the wound on its flank, and the wolf roared in agony, staggering back. Eve didn't hesitate. She pressed the advantage, striking again, driving the shard deeper. The wolf retaliated with a wild swipe, and Eve barely managed to duck, feeling the rush of air above her head. "Stay down, you overgrown mutt," she gritted through clenched teeth, plunging the shard in one last time before retreating. The wolf stumbled, its wounded leg finally giving out. It collapsed to one knee, panting heavily, eyes burning with fury. Eve backed away slowly, keeping a wary eye on it. She could see the doubt flickering in its gaze now, a realization that she wasn't the easy prey it had been promised. Up above, Zerlon's smooth voice cut through again. Impressive. Perhaps there is more to this human resilience than we anticipated. But adaptability is a trait shared by all predators. Eve's stomach dropped. The wolf's form shifted subtly, muscles tightening in a way she didn't like. It lunged, faster than before, using sheer brute force. Eve leaped to the side, but this time it anticipated her movement, swiping mid-air. The blow caught her shoulder, sending her sprawling to the ground. Pain exploded down her arm. "Shit," she gasped, scrambling back. The wolf advanced, sensing her vulnerability. Her mind raced. She couldn't outrun it, and the wound she'd inflicted wouldn't hold it back much longer. She needed another plan, something that didn't rely on speed or brute force. Her eyes darted around the arena. The control panel. If she could reactivate the sonic dissonance frequency she'd triggered earlier, it might give her another opening. Ignoring the pain, she pushed to her feet and bolted toward the panel. The wolf roared and gave chase, its claws scraping against the floor with terrifying speed. Eve threw herself forward, sliding across the ground to reach the panel just in time. Her fingers flew over the alien interface, ripping wires and pressing random sequences. A low hum pulsed through the chamber. The wolf skidded to a halt, ears twitching, its snarl deepening into a pained whine. Eve turned, watching as the beast recoiled, its claws scraping at its skull. "Yeah, not a fan of high frequencies, are you?" she muttered, chest heaving. The wolf thrashed violently, but Eve had no illusions, it wouldn't last long. She needed to end this while she still had the upper hand. Gritting her teeth, she grabbed a loose wire and wrenched it free, causing a crackling spark to jump from the console. A twisted smile crossed her face as an idea formed. She rushed forward, brandishing the sparking wire like a whip. The wolf staggered, its legs faltering under the sound's assault. Eve seized the moment, thrusting the wire toward the wound in its side. The spark caught, and with a sickening crackle, the beast convulsed violently. A deafening howl echoed through the chamber, and Eve staggered back, shielding her face from the bright blue flare. Smoke curled from the wound, and the wolf collapsed, twitching weakly. Eve stood over it, breathing hard, her hands trembling. Her victory felt hollow. She knew better than to celebrate too soon. A slow, deliberate clap echoed from above. "Remarkable," Zerlon drawled, amusement lacing his tone. "You truly are a fascinating specimen, human. But tell me, how long do you think you can keep this up? Eventually, you will break." Eve wiped a smear of blood from her forehead and glared up at the observation deck. "You have no idea what I can endure." Zerlon chuckled. "We shall see." The sound of grinding metal filled the arena as new doors creaked open. Eve's stomach twisted in dread. Whatever was coming next, she was certain it wouldn't be easier. She cast one last glance at the motionless wolf, half expecting it to rise again, but it remained still. With a resigned sigh, she tightened her grip on the sparking wire and faced the next challenge. "I never liked easy fights anyway," she muttered under her breath. The ground beneath Eve's feet trembled with a rhythmic pulse, each vibration growing stronger as something massive stirred beyond the arena walls. Her breath came in sharp, controlled bursts, eyes darting toward the newly opened steel doors. The wolf lay still behind her, tendrils of smoke curling from its charred wound. But Eve knew better than to trust stillness in this place. "Guess round two's starting early," she muttered, fingers curling tightly around the sparking wire she'd salvaged. The speakers crackled, and Zerlon's voice oozed with smug satisfaction. "You've proven yourself resourceful, human. But your luck will run out soon enough. Shall we see what you're truly made of?" Eve didn't respond. She focused on the sound emanating from the darkness beyond the doors, a deep, mechanical hiss followed by the distinct clank of heavy metal feet. Then it emerged. A towering automaton, its chitinous armor reflecting the dim arena lights, stepped forward with unsettling precision. It was a hybrid, part machine, part alien predator, its segmented limbs moving with fluid menace. Rows of razor-sharp mandibles twitched within its elongated maw, and its multi-lensed eyes locked onto Eve with chilling calculation. She exhaled sharply. Oh great, a bugbot. The creature lunged, swift despite its bulk. Eve barely evaded, rolling to the side as its massive claw slammed into the floor, leaving a crater where she'd been standing. Sparks rained down, the sheer force rattling her bones. She scrambled to her feet and sprinted toward the perimeter, scanning for anything she could use. The towering predator was relentless, its joints hissing with hydraulic pressure as it pursued her with lethal precision. Eve's mind raced, cataloging every potential advantage. The exposed wiring along the arena floor. The cracked metal plating along the walls. The scorch marks left behind by previous victims. She gritted her teeth. Time to get creative. Pivoting sharply, she sprinted toward the wall, leaping up and gripping an exposed beam. The automaton's claws swiped just beneath her feet, scraping against the steel with a shriek. Using the momentum, she swung herself around and landed on the beast's armored back, wrapping her legs around its neck. "Let's see how you handle some old-fashioned human improvisation," she shouted, jamming the sparking wire into a crevice between its armored plates. Electricity crackled and the beast convulsed, its mechanical limbs jerking spasmodically. Eve grinned, gripping tighter as the creature thrashed violently in an attempt to shake her off. She pulled out a shard of metal from her belt and drove it deep into the same spot, twisting hard. The automaton screeched, its sensors flickering erratically. Eve leapt off just before it slammed itself against the wall in a desperate bid to dislodge the foreign objects embedded in its body. She hit the ground hard, pain flaring up her side, but pushed through it. "You really need better cybersecurity," she muttered, catching her breath. Zerlon's voice filtered through the speakers again, though now laced with irritation. "I underestimated your recklessness, human. But brute force alone won't save you forever." Eve wiped sweat from her brow, eyeing the twitching automaton as it slowly recalibrated. He was right. She couldn't rely on just reactive strikes, she needed a definitive plan. The longer she lasted, the more they'd adapt. And she wasn't going to play their game any longer. She scanned the arena again, her gaze settling on the wolf's lifeless form. An idea sparked in her mind. Its internal organs might still carry a bioelectrical charge, enough to overload the machine if used correctly. With renewed determination, she sprinted to the wolf, kneeling beside its flank. It was still warm, its muscled frame trembling faintly. Eve worked quickly, reaching for the damaged neural implant embedded near the base of its skull. With a sharp twist, she yanked it free, exposing the pulsating organic wiring within. "Sorry, big guy," she whispered. "But you're helping me get out of here." The automaton lurched toward her, recovering its full range of motion. Eve barely had time to think as she spliced the organic wiring to the damaged shard embedded in the beast's flank. The makeshift connection hummed to life. The machine charged, and Eve stood her ground. Heart hammering, she waited until the last possible second before diving aside and jamming the wolf's neural implant into the exposed wires she'd earlier accessed in the arena floor. A surge of energy pulsed through the connection. The arena flickered with blue light. A high-pitched screech erupted from the automaton as its systems overloaded, its limbs spasming uncontrollably. Sparks exploded from its body, and with a final shudder, it collapsed in a smoking heap. Eve staggered to her feet, gasping for air. "Adapt or die," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Silence followed. Then the speakers buzzed to life once more, this time with a slow, deliberate clap. Zerlon's voice dripped with thinly veiled admiration. "I must admit, human, you continue to surprise me. But you're far from finished." The overhead lights flickered, and Eve's stomach tightened. She knew this wasn't the end. The real fight was still ahead. She took a deep breath and squared her shoulders. She'd come this far. No way was she stopping now. Looking up toward the observation deck, she raised her middle finger defiantly. "Send whatever you've got next, lizard. I'm not going down easy." The laughter that echoed through the arena was low and filled with amusement. "Very well, human. Let the real test begin." A new door groaned open, and a sickly green mist seeped into the chamber. Eve braced herself, ready for whatever nightmare they were about to unleash next. The thick green mist curled around Eve's boots, filling the air with a pungent metallic tang. Her every breath burned her lungs, but she forced herself to stay focused. Shapes moved within the haze, shifting, crawling, circling. She could hear them now, low chittering noises that set her teeth on edge. She took a step back, eyes scanning the dense fog for any sign of movement. "All right, Zerlon," she muttered, wiping the sweat from her brow, "let's see what other nightmares you've got lined up." The overhead speakers crackled, and the Varaxi commander's voice dripped with amusement. "You've impressed me, human. But endurance has its limits." Eve rolled her shoulders, forcing a smirk despite the fear gnawing at her gut. "You don't know what limits are until you've pulled a 48-hour shift in a war zone with nothing but a med kit and bad coffee." Before Zerlon could respond, the mist shifted violently, and something massive slithered forward. Eve's stomach tightened. A grotesque hybrid of sinewy flesh and mechanical plating emerged, its elongated, segmented body undulating with eerie precision. Rows of needle-like appendages lined its underbelly, clicking rhythmically as it advanced. A single red eye glowed at the center of its bulbous head, tracking her every movement. Eve exhaled through gritted teeth. "Great. A cyber centipede. That's original." The creature lunged with terrifying speed, its needle-tipped legs scraping against the floor as it shot forward. Eve twisted out of the way, barely avoiding its snapping mandibles. She rolled, landing hard on her shoulder, and sprang to her feet just as it whipped around to strike again. Her mind raced. There had to be a way to use the environment to her advantage. She spotted the flickering control panel she damaged earlier, and an idea sparked. The centipede coiled to strike, and Eve sprinted toward the console, hoping it still had some life left. "You like to play games, Zerlon," she called out, fingers flying over the alien interface. "Let's see how you handle mine." The screen flickered, and Eve overrode the arena's ventilation systems. A sudden gust swept through the chamber, thinning the fog just enough to reveal the centipede's full length. Its chitinous plates shimmered in the artificial light, and Eve spotted a weak point, exposed wiring running along its thorax. "Gotcha," she whispered, grabbing a loose pipe from the ground. The centipede lunged again, and Eve ducked under its lashing tail, using its momentum against it. She swung the pipe with all her strength, driving it into the creature's exposed wiring. Sparks flew, and the beast writhed, shrieking in a mixture of pain and fury. She drove the pipe in deeper, feeling it catch against something important. The creature convulsed violently, its segmented body thrashing against the walls. Eve jumped back, narrowly avoiding its final death throes as it collapsed in a twitching heap. Her chest heaved, and for a brief moment, all was still. Then, the speakers crackled. Zerlon's voice was devoid of amusement now, tinged with something else, frustration. "You continue to defy expectations. But this ends now." Eve wiped sweat and grime from her face, glaring up at the observation deck. "You talk too much," she muttered, turning her attention to the control panel. If she could access the core systems, she might be able to override the arena's security. Her fingers worked quickly, bypassing layers of alien encryption with instinctive precision. Years of battlefield improvisation had taught her more than just medicine. Sometimes survival required hacking into enemy tech under pressure. Red warning symbols flashed across the screen. Eve smirked. "Found your kill switch." Before Zerlon could intervene, she slammed her fist onto the final command. A deep, shuddering hum coursed through the facility as the arena doors groaned open. Lights flickered, and alarms blared overhead. Eve stepped back, her eyes locked on the newly revealed exit. Freedom was so close she could taste it. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the final push. Then she heard it, the low, guttural growl behind her. She turned slowly. The wolf, the one she'd assumed dead, stood on shaky legs, eyes burning with primal rage. Blood dripped from its wounds, but it wasn't down yet. Eve tightened her grip on the metal shard still in her hand. "You've got to be kidding me." The wolf lunged, slower than before but no less dangerous. Eve sidestepped, using its weakness against it. The beast stumbled, and Eve drove her weapon deep into its injured flank. The wolf howled in agony, collapsing under its own weight. Instead of delivering the final blow, she hesitated. Something in its eyes flickered, not just pain, but understanding. She could end it now, but something told her not to. Instead, she took a step back, breathing hard. "You're not the enemy," she muttered. "Just another victim in this twisted experiment." The wolf wheezed, its body shuddering as it fought to stay upright. Eve shook her head. She didn't have time for sentiment. But as she turned toward the exit, the wolf, against all odds, rose to its feet and limped beside her. Eve stared at it. "You're coming with me?" she asked, incredulous. The beast didn't respond, but its intent was clear. Whatever had been done to it, it was choosing to follow her now. Eve allowed a small grin. "Fine. But if you eat me later, I'll haunt you." Together, they moved toward the exit. Overhead, Zerlon's voice crackled with growing fury. "You cannot escape. You are nothing but a test subject." Eve glanced up and gave the observation deck one final salute. "Then consider the experiment terminated." She and the wolf crossed the threshold into the unknown, alarms blaring behind them. The cold air hit her like a slap, but it felt like freedom. She didn't know what lay beyond these walls, but she'd survived worse. She would survive this too. Epilogue. Eve and the wolf trudged through the frozen wasteland of Xiphos 9, a vast expanse of ice and jagged cliffs stretching out before them. The night sky above was filled with unfamiliar stars, and the distant hum of Varaxi patrol ships echoed in the distance. The wolf limped beside her, each step steady, as if it had finally found something worth following. Eve glanced down at it, a strange sense of camaraderie settling between them. "We're not done yet," she murmured, squinting at the distant horizon. "But we're free. And that's a damn good start." As they disappeared into the tundra, Zerlon watched from his control room, his claws digging into the armrests of his chair. A slow, dangerous smile crept across his face. "The human thinks she's won," he whispered. "Let her run. We'll see how long she lasts." But Eve didn't look back. She had survived their game, and now it was time to play by her own rules.